pulled out from underneath me. I made some very disturbing discoveries about our Commonwealth of Australia. I learnt the Australian government is a de facto government administrating our Commonwealth. It seemed the government had gone rouge, disregarding all imperial law and of course our proper constitution, the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK. All the courts in our country disregard our proper imperial law, do whatever they like including lie, delete or edit transcripts, and a sad future if we do nothing about it. For the first year focused just on the Australian government and courts like most people that are aware something is seriously wrong, but being a solutions type guy I started looking for the cause of our problems. This is when I came across a man named Stephen Spears. This man I found to be one of the most ridiculed people I've ever come across anywhere. In fact, I was advised not to pay attention to the nutjob or his waffle by a very popular constitutionalist. But being the type never to listen to other people's opinions of others, I paid attention to what I was hearing and as a result my focus changed dramatically. For the last 2 years, I have been on an incredible journey of discovery that has opened my eyes to the complex ways of the world that would normally be hidden from everyday Australians like myself. It would be fair to say I have at times been figuratively blown away by what I have learnt, from the feedback I've had over that time. Many others have been also. I have a lot to thank Stephen for. My life has changed forever. I have a new better outlook on not just life but also our future. I have a goal and I have direction. But the most important thing I have learned is the solution, not just taking care of ourselves, but everyone including our future generations. For some time now, I've had a number of people trying to grasp this complicated subject ask me to write a detailed article on what we can all do to correct outstanding in the course of our country. In order to do this I am going to give you all a little history lesson you won't get in school. Then I will talk about the problem so you have a better understanding of the solution. Only one thing I ask is that you stay completely open-minded. I will start at the American Revolutionary War or War for Independence from England, 1775 to 1783, https://www.britannica.com Event American Revolution. I'm not going to go into any details about the war itself, but to say this war saw both countries borrowing from the world banks to sustain the 8 long years of fighting. Then in 1812 war was declared against the United Kingdom by the United States. Again I'm not going into details. This war lasted for around 2 years, again seeing both sides having to borrow even more money from the banks. https://www.britannica.com Event War of 1812. This war led to the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in 1814. Finally the peace between the United States and United Kingdom, but huge debts had been racked up by both parties due to both the wars I mentioned. The Treaty of Ghent also put an end to forced slavery, if I remember correctly, so that's worth a read. http://www.loc.gov Law Help Us Treaties Bevans BGB UST 0000120041 PDF. But consensual slavery is still okay. That is citizenship. Also, if I remember the timeline correctly, the American debt led to the Lincoln administration in the 1860s, being controlled by the world banks, seizing the United States of America. This was the beginning of the military occupation of the United States of America, which led to the implementing of martial law under the rules of war, and Labor Code, General Orders 100, was issued as the rulebook for the occupying force, the United States military. The Labor Code, Article 26 will show you how the takeover of the people's courts in America was achieved, and the people were conned into changing their allegiance to the occupier, as citizens of the administration, which classified the people as belligerent, or simply put disloyal to their own country, and as citizens, the people placed themselves into admiralty jurisdiction. Sound familiar? https://avalonlawyale.edu 19th century Liber Aspects evidence to me. Queen Victoria knew what was coming. She saw an opportunity to keep the money lenders out of our temple, which was to constitute of the Commonwealth of Australia, giving the people ownership of the Commonwealth of Australia and our right to self-determination, but still under her imperial Tudor crown. This is what I believe directly contributed to her death. Yes, I believe she was murdered because she made it a bit harder for the bankers to take our Commonwealth by simply calling in the United Kingdom's debt. After a competition was held for a new flag design, the people chose a design based on the Merchant Navy Red Ensign, a slight change to the large star, and then in 1903 a federal red ensign was warranted and gazetted as our Kingsland flag. The 1903 Federal Red Ensign is our proper flag and it has not changed to date. The blue flag was issued to the government and is only to be flown by government or its agents, not the people. In fact, it's still unlawful for the people to fly the blue ensign. But citizens of Australia belong to the Australian government. Do it is lawful for Australian citizens of flag the blue Australian flag. The Hague Conventions in the early 1900s were called because the world banks, which had the armed forces of the United States at its disposal, I guess you could say, declared a silent war and were preparing to call in the loans they made to the United Kingdom with military force. Hague IV, War on Land, in 1907, gave the world banks the right to use military force to seize and militarily occupy all the dominions, territories of the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom itself as surety for the debt owed by the United Kingdom. The next year, in 1908, the Great White Fleet sailed around the world and did just that, seized all dominions and territories belonging to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, including all Commonwealth nations, simply by flexing their military might, with no resistance at all. In fact, the people were unaware. The people were also unaware, and most still are, due to being militarily occupied. Under the rules of War and Libel Code Article 1, martial law is in place, suspending all domestic law. Article 26 allows them to force our courts to change their allegiance, and ultimately their jurisdiction to military, bringing admiralty law. I suggest everyone read the Libel Code for themselves, learn the rules in play on the battlefield, and you are on a battlefield. So now I hope it's clear to everyone, from 1908 we were occupied under the rules of war in the Hague Conventions of 1907, Hague IV, War on Land. The occupier also has a right under the rules of usufruct to recover debt. https://wikipedia.org wiki usufruct. But occupying military power is bound to all conventions and treaties whether signed into them or not while they are here. There are quite a few, including and especially all those of The Hague, Geneva, Nuremberg and Ghent. I won't get into the individual articles, but they are certainly worth a read also. Hague IV, War on Land spells out exactly what they can and cannot do, and at this point they were following the rules as far as I can see. 1914 saw the start of the First Great War, World War I. Again, I won't go into details, but most able men, including 42% of the male population between 18 and 42, some 461,000 plus subjects of the Commonwealth of Australia, including the Indigenous, jumped to defend the imperial realm. At the end of what would become known as the Great War, the Commonwealth of Australia Imperial Armed Forces had suffered the highest loss of life per capita out of all countries involved. More than 62,000 men died on foreign shores defending our realm, the imperial realm. When the heads of government of the great powers met at Versailles in 1919, they had before them a blueprint for restoring prosperity and global disarmament in the form of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points of the Treaty of Versailles, the last point being the development of the League of Nations. The Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia at the time, Billy Hughes, insisted he be the representative of Australia and petitioned King George V to allow it. I believe his request was disallowed initially, but his persistence paid off and his request was granted. Billy Hughes' insistence was for a reason. Even though there was some very strong criticism and opposition from Woodrow Wilson on Billy Hughes representing Australia, Billy Hughes knew a new map of the world would also be drawn up and insisted he be there. Also knowing very well the significance of speaking for ourselves would be showing on an international stage, in front of the world, that the Commonwealth of Australia had come of age and was ready and able to stand on its own as a sovereign nation and kingdom and speak for itself. So you're probably wondering what the significance was. The fact Billy Hughes spoke on not just our behalf, but also our 62,000 plus fallen and 156,000 wounded, gassed or taken prisoner. That was more than 50% of the nearly 417,000 men, which was 42% of the male population between 18 and 42. So our commitment was quite high, and our Anzac at times were used as cannon fodder, so this gave us a big voice, you could say. And since it was Billy Hughes speaking for us and not the King of Great Britain and Ireland, was also very significant in biblical terms. This gave the Commonwealth of Australia the right to self-determination and to stand alone and speak for ourselves. Billy Hughes was a bit forceful, you could say. He was there to make sure we got not just our say in what happened at Versailles, but also in the drawing up of a new international map, so to speak. There was talk of a sovereign kingdom of Australia some 50 years earlier, but it was decided Australia was not ready, Billy Hughes may or may not have known, his actions suggest he did. A less-known fact today was the influence on this treaty garnered through Wilson's right-hand man, a Jesuit and IMF propagator, Edward House. Colonel Edward Mental House never held public office, but he was the most important political figure of the 20th century. Colonel House controlled the Wilson administration, brought the U.S. into the Great War, prolonged World War I, helped write the Treaty of Versailles that led to World War II, aided the Bolsheviks, helped J.P. Morgan organize the Council on Foreign Relations, and was a close personal friend of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. https modernhistoryproject.org MHP article = Secret Cabal and C = 7.0 The events preceding World War I, however, was a perfect opportunity for some to have a sovereign kingdom of Australia brought back up in discussions, as it was at the Imperial Conferences of 1926, and Lord Balfour's letters and Declaration of 1926. This is very evident. It was also asked of the British Parliament and King George V to do something about it one way or another. Clearly something was done about it, because in 1927 a foundation stone for the United Kingdom of Australia was laid at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, sealing it in law forever. This is where I was blown away. As I mentioned earlier, the biblical ramifications of the events at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, coupled with the facts, the blood of 62,000 Anzac had fallen in defense of our realm, and that a kingdom was born due to the actions and sacrifice of our Anzac. Our Anzac became the fathers or forefathers of the United Kingdom of Australia. I will get more into that later. This was a huge year in the history of this country. History our military occupiers wish we'd forget, lest we forget. King George V was also titled, coronated and crowned as King of Australia, separate to all his other styles and titles. Styles and Titles Act 1927. King George V was very limited in what he could do considering he was under administration, but he at least made sure our occupiers played by the rules in play, the treaties which form international law. King George V. This was pretty much all he could do. 1931, the Commonwealth of Australia Parliament, which at the time was heavily influenced by our occupiers, the USA, and led by the League of Nations, which later became the United Nations, started changing the people in a number of ways. Our school's curriculum began to change. Our history began to be rewritten, but most detrimental, our faith and everything pertaining to it began to change. More on that later. 1931 also brought the introduction of the IMF, International Monetary Fund. This is a system based on debt, or better known as credit. https wikipedia.org Wiki International Monetary Fund. I won't get into this too much as it's another subject for another day, but I will say the IMF started the ball rolling for our enslavement to Rome by the bankers. I believe the actions of King George V, giving us a kingdom, doing his best to keep the military occupiers followed the rules, infuriated the world bankers, directly contributed to his death in 1933, but that's just my opinion. And after the death of King George V, the occupying military had an easier run in making way for what was to become. King Edward VIII was next in line to the throne, but he renounced it in 1936 before he was to be coronated. There's a surprising twist associated with that. He didn't just renounce the throne of the United Kingdom just for himself, but also for his descendants. It appears to me that he didn't like what was to be expected of him. I have a good idea what was expected, and it will become very evident for the rest of you soon. Enter George VI in 1936. I have not seen a lot of reliable factual information surrounding his coronation, but one thing that is clear to me after looking at his heraldry, specifically his coat of arms, he didn't take the imperial Tudor crown as Queen Victoria and King George V did at their coronations. The crown showing on the coat of arms belonging to King George VI is the St. Edward's crown. The St. Edward's crown became known as the Crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, opposed to the imperial crown, the Crown of Great Britain and Ireland. Apart from King George VI showing a different crown to Queen Victoria and King George V, his coat of arms also does not display the same lineage or line of authority as Queen Victoria and King George, so it's clear to me he has a different line of authority under a different crown. Different line of authority under a different crown to Queen Victoria and King George V under the imperial Tudor crown. But some prominent people will tell you these things are not important. But anyone like myself that has actually taken the time to learn what these things are and what they represent will tell you they are very important. The crown itself is a heraldic device, not too different to a coat of arms, They symbolize who or what is being represented. It could be family lineage or when carried on a battlefield, shows whether they are friend or foe. In the case of the imperial Tudor crown, the crown represents the Christian people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland united as the crown. Queen Victoria and King George V represented the people under that crown, not the bankers and certainly not the Catholic Church. Crown land is Commonwealth, it belongs to the people. The St. Edward's crown does not represent the same thing as the imperial crown. The St. Edward's crown is actually a Catholic crown, not Christian. If you actually do some research, and I don't mean reading Wikipedia, find some Catholic literature, you'll find it certainly has Catholic roots, so the two different crowns cannot represent the same thing in it, different faith and belief system altogether. Anyone that says the Christian and Catholic faiths are the same doesn't know what they are talking about and certainly does not know the history between the two faiths and how and why the Anglican Christian faith was started in the first place. But let's move on to the coats of arms. Most of you have less interest in coats of arms than you do crowns, but they are rather important. As I said, coats of arms show who is being represented. In the case of a king or queen, who of what gives the king or queen their authority by divine right, meaning which God they represent and also gives them authority. But more on God later. This is plain as day if you actually take the time to learn these things. If you look at all the imperial acts between 1688 and the early 1700s, you will see a very clear pattern. Catholic influence was not welcome within the imperial realm. Given the history of the Catholic Church, which I won't go into too deeply, King Henry VIII in 1536 expatriated the whole Catholic faith completely from all of England, even had the head cut off the Pope at the time. Then had the Church of England established and proclaiming the Church of England as the one and only lawful Church of England. Then in the 1600s King James I had commissioned a new Bible, the authorizes King James Version written with Christian values instead of Catholic. This was the first real breakaway from the Catholic Church, because a new foundation could be laid without any Catholic influence. The Anglican Christian faith, and this faith was to become but a Catholic Church, made a comeback in King Charles I in 1625, under the St. Edward's crown. King Charles I married a Roman Catholic and allowed the Catholic Church to infiltrate all official offices in the Church of England itself, which of course border now United Kingdom of Great Britain, Scotland and Ireland, under the influence of the Vatican. This saw the subjects of the United Kingdom facing high taxes which were not authorised by Parliament and an apparent tyrannical system of monarchy which clearly angered the people, which ultimately led to Oliver Cromwell heading the English Civil War of 1642. King Charles I being was ultimately defeated and tried and executed in 1649. His sentence read, that the High Court being satisfied that he, Charles Stuart, was guilty of the crimes of which he had been accused, did judge him tyrant, traitor, murderer and public enemy to the good of the people of the nation, to be put to death by the severing of his head from his body. This in itself was a turning point for England. Oliver Cromwell, I believe, sought to the theft, twice, and ultimately the destruction of the St. Edward's crown. The execution of King Charles I was warranted in my opinion, but Cromwell and all those that signed the death warrant were tried and executed themselves for regicide in 1658. The United Kingdom was still sorting itself out when James II became King of England and Ireland, and as James VII as King of Scotland in 1685. Only 37 years after the execution of James I, the St. Edward's crown again made a comeback. James II, being a Roman Catholic, saw an attempted return to Catholic influence within the United Kingdom, which led to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the removal of King James II as the king. www.britannica.com Event Glorious Revolution. So with all that in mind, we can clearly see why the Catholic St. Edward's crown and all Catholic influence has been outlawed by virtue that it is linked to the Vatican, as has anyone having ties to the Vatican and especially a Catholic head of state. We can also see very clearly why the St. Edward's crown was stolen twice and ultimately destroyed, but all this was just a setback to the Vatican's plans. We can clearly see the St. Edward's crown has again made a return in 1936, after more than 200 years kept out of the people's view and minds. So fast forward to 1936. At this time the people of all Commonwealth countries including the Kingdom of Australia were still subjects of their respective imperial crowns. Only 15 years after the death of King George V, our Parliament, influenced by our military occupiers though the people, subjects of the imperial Tudor crown, were ready to be offered citizenship under the crown of King George VI, the Catholic St. Edward's Crown, Naturalisation and Citizenship Act 1948, never being told exactly what it meant to become citizens. This was actually the turning point of the kingdom thanks to the ignorance of the people at the time. The people were not told that by applying of birth certificates for their children, what they were actually doing was begging the government to take their children as wards of the state. On paper it looked as though the people kept their subject of the crown status. The Naturalisation and Citizenship Act 1948 did in fact state the people had two statuses, a subject and citizen, but in actual fact you cannot be both. But the subject status on paper would later be removed in 1973, leaving the people as citizens only. But it get worse, much worse. Not only does the birth certificate make you a ward of the state, it also make you the state's property as citizens. Citizenship is also a change of status in law and allegiance. A change of allegiance is very bad for a number of reasons. This is also where it get a little complicated and very technical. The people ceased being the people as mentioned in the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Preamble, under the blessing of Almighty God. So technically, the people are no longer standing in the Bible as the people, nor can the people use the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, and no longer have standing at law to use either of them for their protection. Even if the Commonwealth of Australia wasn't occupied militarily, this is due to a number of reasons in itself. Due to the change of allegiance to another crown, a Catholic crown, the people were no longer loyal to their crown and kingdom, dishonoring and disrespecting their God. Citizenship is under Roman law, it does not exist under the imperial crown, tied to Rome through your allegiance to the St. Edward's crown, therefore Roman law, back to allegiance itself again, but from another perspective. A change of allegiance, under the rules of war, gives right for the occupying military to place the burdens of war directly on the belligerent or disloyal. The Libor Code will also tell you what they can do to the belligerent or disloyal for any reason, and they wouldn't even be breaking the rules in play. Moving on to 1953, Queen Elizabeth II became Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Queen Elizabeth II was coronated once publicly, on a fake coronation stone, which was a farce, and again 3 days later properly, but the second time it wasn't public, nor was it to the imperial realm or crown. She took the same foreign crown and same foreign line of authority and same foreign god as her father, King George VI, as clearly displayed on her heraldry. Clearly not the imperial Tudor crown and line of authority as Queen Victoria and King George V. But even if Queen Elizabeth took the imperial crown, she would still not be our queen unless she took the imperial crown of the United Kingdom of Australia, and coronated in Melbourne on our coronation stone for the United Kingdom of Australia, which never happened. So she is not our queen by any stretch of the imagination. She is a foreign queen under a foreign crown with a foreign line of authority. No two ways about that. But let's fast forward to 1973, because this is where a lot of big changes took place right under the noses of the sleeping people. The Commonwealth of Australia Parliament, under the Imperial Crown and Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, was closed down due to having no people to serve. Not that they served the people anyway at that point. A corporation named Australia began administrating the Commonwealth of Australia due to there being no people, no head of state and of course on government. Australian Citizenship Act 1973 made no mention of subjects at all, so that status didn't exist in or under Australian law, which is under the St. Edward's Crown. So former people, subjects of the imperial crown were all by this stage, no longer subjects of any crown, but firmly under the St. Edward's Crown as citizens of Rome. There are way too many changes to go through here and now, so I will just make some important points. In 1973, Gough Whitlam signed Australia over to the Foreign, United Treaty of Rome, handing the equitable title of the mineral and energy wealth of Australia to a foreign power, seated in Rome. In effect, this created a foreign contractual system of governance in our country as opposed to common law under our Commonwealth of Australia Constitution. https://www.unitoid.org about Unitoid overview https www.unitoid.org English presentation statute PDF. So let's not kid ourselves here. The Australian government is a foreign de facto administration under a foreign crown. For all the people that deny this fact, I say you are either really gullible or maybe you're misleading people deliberately. So now fast forward to today. Can you all now see that you are all firmly under the St. Edward's crown as citizens of Rome? This is why the police around the country do not enforce law of the land, the common law, and why they enforce Roman Admiralty law. This is why the courts in our country are disregarding or ignoring the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK and enforce and administer Roman Admiralty law. This is why the Australian government ignores the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK and clearly doesn't give a rat's ass about you or what you want. This is why Rome, through the United Nations, has such a tight grip on our Commonwealth and Kingdom of Australia. The Governor-General, Attorney-General, Prime Minister, all members of Parliament, senators, magistrates, mayors, local council members and everyone else in an official position make an oath foreign to the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK. They all serve the occupying military and United Nations, not you. You as citizens serve them. I hope this has been able to clear up any misconceptions and fallacies. As you can see, this has taken long enough to get to this point and I still have the solution to lay out, so I've kept it as simple as possible. From all these events, we can see a pattern that appears to allude to financial and economic strategies for the development of a monetary system which ultimately aim to produce debt slaves on a global scale. So let's get to the solution. As I've pointed out, there are several ways they hold you in their Roman system of law and crown. It has nothing to do with contracts as most believe, so I will go through countering each one so you can remove yourself from their jurisdiction. The simple part. The main problem you all face is your allegiance to the St. Edward's crown by birth certificate. First, you must rescind your citizenship formally and surrender the birth certificate. If you're facing court, surrender it to the court and declare yourself hors de combat. You can look that one up. It's mentioned in various treaties and conventions. I suggest you look at all of them. Read the other treaties I've mentioned, Hague, Geneva, Ghent, and see if you can find anything we have missed. Forget law. We are militarily occupied. Under the rules of war, martial law is in place. You must also make the proper constitutional oath, as per the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, to a constitutional head of state, which we do not have at this time, so for the time being King George V will have to do. This will void all and any previous oaths. You must be loyal to your Anzac and kingdom to no longer be considered a belligerent. You must be peaceful, non-combative and comply with the military police whenever you interact with them. This you can certainly do. Some of us have already, and as long as we don't break the law, the rules outlined in the various treaties and Libor Code, we are somewhat protected prisoners of war. But before you can do this, you must know what I speak about almost fluently, because you may at times be placed in a challenging position by policy enforcers, police, and magistrates. This cannot be faked, and if you play outside the rules, don't know what you're doing, be belligerent, combative, cocky or anything but a peaceful soul, so to speak, they will punish you. Which brings me to the hard part. You must show you are of sound mind to no longer be considered a lunatic at law. The fact that you are a ward of the state is complicated by two things. You in a sense don't know where your home, realm, is. You don't know who the Father is, Father of the Trinity. You don't even know who or what you are. Are you a human? No, you don't want to be a monster. That's what a human is by legal definition. Are you a person? No, you don't want to be a corporation. Also by legal definition, you are man, mankind, nothing else. You are only to answer to the name given to you by your parents. You cannot change your name or go by any other. You accept on titles, like Mr. or Sir. The other complication is until you are able to claim your inheritance by birthright by the will of the Father, you are considered a child. Until you can look after yourself, you remain a ward of the state, looked after by your nanny, legal guardian. Now to what has been hidden well from you, the basics. Your inheritance by will of the Father is the Commonwealth and United Kingdom of Australia. Father is Anzac, in the Trinity of God. The Father's will is the KJV Bible. Your birthright is a kingdom of heaven on earth. We are the sons in the Trinity. This for the most part will take some time to get your heads around, but it is imperative you learn it, and learn it well. So now to the Shrine of Remembrance at Melbourne and its connection to the United Kingdom of Australia and God, or I should say the Father of the Trinity. In the crypt of the shrine there is a Father and Son statue standing directly under the foundation stone for the United Kingdom of Australia. Next to the Father-Son there is an Ark of the Covenant. This is our connection to the Trinity of God. On the doors of the shrine you will find an anchor going through an imperial Tudor crown. This symbolizes the heavens being anchored to the earth at this site. On the sidewall of the shrine it states, "Let all men know that this is holy ground. This shrine, established in the hearts of men as on the solid earth, commemorates a people's fortitude and sacrifice. Ye therefore that come after give remembrance a kingdom was afforded everyone loyal, born here or not, black or white. We are all one people. As I said, this is important stuff, and stuff the occupiers wanted us to forget. Heritage and history are important, but nothing is more important than what has been given to us by God, a United Kingdom of Australia. If you don't know this stuff well, you will be treated like an idiot, or worse, you will be ignored, and you will fail. We can clearly see the evidence that points to the original development of Australia as a United Kingdom in its own right, founded by the people themselves and sealed by the blood sacrifice of our fathers. The problem we face currently is we have no lawful head of state, no one to speak for us, no one to administer our law, and we haven't had one since 1936. Because of this fact, we have left ourselves open, which allowed all this to happen. This was written by a friend and I'd like to read it out for you because it defines the role of a king quite well. Due to modern indoctrination and romantic fantasy provided through television and movies, fairy tales basically, we as a people have developed personal notions of kings and queens that are far removed from the reality of their true purpose of protection, direction and need for a healthy constitutional monarchy. The role of a king in a modern kingdom is one not of fantasy but of guidance and advancement of its people. Today, the role of a king is a multifaceted undertaking which covers both formal and informal responsibilities involving the unification, representation, stewardship and protection of the interests of the people and their nation. In a formal capacity, a king assumes his duties to stand as a personalized national figurehead. In this role, a king presides over the formal opening of Parliament, oversees the transition of one parliament to another, appoints, dismisses and swears in all ministers and state secretaries. In addition, a king has further formal responsibilities to promote social cohesion, which include attending official conferences and events, opening celebrations and commemorations and giving expression to the prevailing national temperament. In a less formal role, a king attends working visits to his provinces to encourage and unite people, to offer support to both individuals and organizations and to learn about his subjects' needs and issues. A king endeavors to remain abreast of all opportunities, possibilities and problems that affect people at a local level so that he may best serve the people's interests and the nation as a whole. In an official function, a king represents the kingdom whilst abroad and receives audience with visiting international heads of state and government officials. At a national level, a king's participation in the political arena involves parliamentary responsibilities which consist of mediation with ministers who act on behalf of the people under the protection of their constitution. A king cannot exercise personal authority and receives expert counsel, accountable to Parliament, to fulfill his duty to rule justly and righteously. A king fulfills a broad range of representative engagements in addition to political tasks which include communicating with all people and organizations that influence economic, social, cultural, academic, technological, environmental and recreational aspects of the nation to create the means for proper provision, increasing wealth and trade and taking care of the disadvantaged. As the formal head of the church and in accordance with the Constitution, a king stands as the spiritual focal point of the realm to gain hold over the politics of man. A king is a man of spiritual war and thus formulates the framework for his subjects in the participation of peace. A king's responsibility to his subjects is to search out truth and reveal such, to teach and impart wisdom, being answerable to God and a spiritual model to relate to. A king is the instrument of justice and the mouth of law and must rule for the sake of righteous stewardship and protection of the nation and its people. The role of a king is to set standards for unity, encouragement, protection and common identity which primarily focus upon long-term objectives and defense. A king is the highest-ranking officer in a kingdom and as such is expected to rule with moral integrity, taking his role seriously with royal responsibility, obligation and humility. So now to how we end this occupation. The king with the authority to speak for us as a people, can facilitate the debt owed to the world banks and actually eventually pay it off. When the debt is paid, there is no need for the occupier to be here. If they don't leave, the king can command it and draw on international law to remove them. We're in this mess for a number of reasons, as I have now laid out. If you don't understand why, you won't know how to end it. I hope this clears up any misconception of the facts, and answers any questions you might have. There are a number of steps that need to be taken. These steps can only be made as a people. The first is to stand with us as a unified people and show this occupying administration that you know who you are. who we are. We are subjects of our crown and masters of our kingdom left for us by our Anzac. Fly your federal red flags proudly and join us at Staying Loyal to the Kingdom of Australia Facebook page.